Most people who build a fence over their neighbor's property line think they are only stealing a few inches of dirt. The wealthy and powerful real estate developer Richard thought exactly the same thing. He believed his money could rewrite any boundary line in this quiet Oregon town. For months he had been looking at the beautiful historic property of an old man named Arthur. Richard did not just want a piece of land. He wanted to build a massive luxury apartment complex right where Arthur's ancestral home stood. But Arthur was a retired geologist who knew the true value of the earth beneath his feet. Arthur always refused every predatory contract Richard threw at his front door. So Richard decided to use brute force. He brought in heavy excavators under the cover of darkness to rip apart the boundary line. Richard wanted to build a massive concrete wall that would permanently cut off Arthur's access to his own garden. But Richard did not know that the 7-foot-deep trench his workers dug secretly in the dark would strike an ancient cosmic relic. A multi-million-dollar secret buried in the silent earth for 4 billion years. And that very stolen fence line would trigger an ironclad federal mineral law. A law that would turn Richard from a powerful millionaire into a completely ruined bankrupt man. Welcome back to Fence Line Feud. To truly understand this brutal neighbor war we must go back to the very beginning. Arthur was a 74-year-old widow who spent his days caring for his historic garden. His property had belonged to his family since the late 1800s. Throughout the yard were giant ancient pine trees and rare natural basalt rock formations. Arthur's grandfather had been a pioneering gold surveyor in the Pacific Northwest. Because of this history, Arthur grew up with a deep passion for geology and land preservation. He knew every square inch of his soil. He kept meticulous historical deeds and land survey documents dating back to the 19th century. But to the modern real estate market, Arthur's paradise was just prime commercial real estate. Richard saw the old man as a weak, stubborn relic of the past. Richard was a man who grew up with a silver spoon and built an empire by bullying small landholders. He had already bought out 3 other neighbors on the block using aggressive legal threats and financial pressure. Arthur was the very last piece of the puzzle. 2 months before the excavation, Richard walked onto Arthur's porch with his private security guards. He tossed a thick leather briefcase onto the old wooden table. Inside was $500,000 in cash. "Sign the property over to my development firm and you can live in a luxury condo for free," Richard said. Arthur did not even open the briefcase. He calmly poured a cup of black coffee and looked Richard directly in the eyes. "My grandfather planted these trees and my memories live in this soil, Richard. Your money has no power here. Please leave my property and do not return." Richard's face turned bright red with fury. He slammed his fist against the porch railing. "You are an old man living in a rotting wooden shack, Arthur. Progress will happen whether you like it or not. I will make sure you regret this day." From that afternoon onward the harassment escalated. Richard ordered his construction crews to park heavy dump trucks right against Arthur's driveway. They blasted loud rock music at 6 in the morning to disrupt the old man's sleep. Richard even filed false complaints with the city claiming Arthur's historic trees were a public safety hazard. But Arthur remained completely unshaken. He documented every single incident with security cameras and kept a quiet daily logbook. Seeing that psychological warfare was failing, Richard decided to take the ultimate gamble. He discovered that Arthur was scheduled to attend a 3-day geology convention in Seattle. This was the window of opportunity Richard had been waiting for. He hired a private rogue surveying crew to create a fake temporary land boundary report. He then contacted a local heavy machinery contractor who asked no questions as long as he was paid in cash. At precisely 2 in the morning on a rainy Saturday night the invasion began. A flatbed truck dropped off a heavy compact track excavator directly into the alleyway. Richard stood under a large black umbrella, directing his crew with a high-powered flashlight. "Move the line 25 centimeters deep into his yard," Richard commanded the operator. By the time the old man gets back from Seattle, the concrete foundation will already be poured. His lawyers won't be able to do anything but beg for a settlement. The excavator engine roared to life, spitting thick black diesel smoke into the midnight air. The sharp steel bucket slammed into Arthur's perfect green lawn. It tore through decades of careful gardening, ripping up rare ferns and valuable topsoil. A deep dark trench began to stretch across the property line. The workers moved with intense speed, sweating under the cold rain. They dug down 4 feet, 5 feet, then 6 feet deep. Richard watched the digital clock on his phone ticking away. He was laughing, imagining the look on Arthur's face when he returned. But at exactly 3:45 in the morning, the earth fought back. The excavator bucket descended into the deepest part of the trench near an ancient pine tree. Suddenly a massive metallic shockwave traveled up the hydraulic arms of the machine. A deafening metallic clang echoed across the quiet neighborhood like a bomb going off. The entire 15-ton excavator shuddered violently and tipped forward. The engine loaded up, whining in pure agony before stalling out completely. The operator hit his head against the glass cabin window. "What the hell did you hit?" Richard screamed, running to the edge of the pit. "I don't know, boss, it feels like I just slammed into a solid steel mountain," the driver yelled back. The panicked crew grabbed shovels and jumped down into the muddy trench. They shined their halogen work lights into the darkness. Embedded deep within the clay was a massive dark gray boulder the size of a small car. The surface of the rock was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was covered in smooth, deep thumbprint-like indentations known to scientists as regmaglyphs. The metallic density of the object was so immense that it had completely shattered 2 steel teeth off the excavator bucket. "Bring the high-pressure water pumps," Richard ordered, his heart beating fast. They hooked up a commercial water hose and began blasting the thick layers of ancient mud off the stone. As the heavy clay washed away, the halogen lights caught the rock. The entire trench suddenly lit up with a brilliant, otherworldly glow. Beneath the black iron crust were thousands of golden-green olivine crystals. They were suspended in a flawless reflective matrix of natural silver and nickel. It looked like a massive cluster of cosmic diamonds floating in a sea of liquid silver. Richard's mouth dropped open. He dropped his umbrella into the mud. He had spent his whole life dealing with concrete and dirt, but he knew instantly this was something miraculous. He secretly took 20 high-resolution photos and sent them to a top mineral appraiser in Chicago. 10 minutes later, Richard's phone rang.
It's not secure.
The appraiser's voice was hyperventilating on the speakerphone. "Richard, listen to me very carefully. Do not let anyone touch that stone. If those photos are authentic, you have just uncovered an ultra-rare palisite meteorite. It is a piece of a protoplanet's core from the birth of our solar system. Given the dimensions you described, that specimen weighs at least 3 tons. On the international market, museums and private billionaires will pay upwards of $2 to $3 million for a rock that size. It is the holy grail of geology." Richard's mind exploded with pure, unadulterated greed. $3 million in cash. That was enough to pay off all his corporate debts and buy 3 more neighborhoods. "Forget the fence," Richard hissed to his foreman. "Get a heavy-duty crane here right now. We are pulling this rock out and putting it in my private warehouse before the sun comes up." The foreman looked at the boundary markers nervously. "Boss, we can't do that. The center of this boulder is deep on Arthur's side of the line. Even with our fake survey, this rock is technically under his house's root system." Richard grabbed the foreman by his jacket collar, his eyes wild. "I don't care about his roots, I don't care about his line. The old man is in Seattle. We dig it up now, or I find a crew who will." But Richard's grand plan underestimated the old geologist. Arthur had actually returned 12 hours early because the Seattle convention ended ahead of schedule. At 5:30 in the morning, just as the horizon was turning a faint gray, Arthur's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out and stood frozen. His backyard looked like a war zone. A massive trench ran across his property. His ancient pine tree roots were exposed and a commercial crane truck was backing into his garden. Richard was screaming orders at men with heavy steel chains. Arthur did not lose his temper. He did not curse or cry.
What if they bring up the emails?
He walked inside his house, put on his favorite warm wool sweater, picked up a yellow notepad and a calibrated digital GPS surveyor tool. He walked calmly out to the edge of the trench. Richard saw him and immediately stepped in front of the pit, trying to block his view. "Arthur, you're back early," Richard said, trying to sound casual. "We had a major drainage emergency on the borderline. My crew is just clearing out a hazardous underground boulder to save your foundation." Arthur ignored the developer completely.
Meteorites are legally
He stepped past Richard and looked down into the deep muddy hole. The moment Arthur saw the golden olivine crystals reflecting the morning light, his heart skipped a beat. He recognized the palisade structure instantly. He had studied small fragments of this exact meteorite in museums, but he had never seen a pristine 3-ton specimen in his entire career. Arthur calibrated his digital GPS tool, placing it directly on the government-certified boundary pin. He extended the laser line across the trench. The laser sliced right through the middle of the meteorite, showing that 85% of its mass rested deep within Arthur's deeded property. Arthur looked up, his face perfectly calm but his eyes as sharp as flint. "Richard, this excavation is an illegal trespass on my land," Arthur said. "This object is a palisade meteorite and it resides in my soil. Remove your men and your machinery immediately." Richard laughed a cruel, mocking laugh. "Are you blind, old man? This pit is on my construction site. My men discovered it. My money paid for the machinery that found it. There is a law in this country called finders keepers. This rock belongs to my corporation. Now get out of the way before my crane moves you." Arthur stepped back and pulled out his phone. He did not call local police dispatch. He called the direct private line of the regional director of the Bureau of Land Management, an old colleague from his university days. He then called the state police department and the head of the Oregon Space Science Museum. Within 20 minutes the quiet suburban street erupted into chaos. For state police, cruisers with flashing red and blue lights blocked the roads.
Breaking news tonight, a stunning
Two
development
black
in the
federal
ongoing Meteorite
SUVs slammed their
trespass
brakes in the
lawsuit.
grass.
Sources confirm the celestial object
A
landed
team of
directly
federal
on the
agents and
plaintiff's
state
property.
scientists jumped out carrying federal seizure warrants. They immediately ran yellow federal property tape across both yards, trapping Richard's crane inside the zone. "What is this?" Richard screamed at the state troopers. "You can't do this. I am a taxpayer. I own this project." The lead state trooper stepped forward, his hand resting on his holster. "Sir, you are currently interfering with a federal geological investigation under the Antiquities Act and state mineral preservation codes. Step away from the vehicle or you will be placed under arrest immediately." A world-renowned meteoriticist from the state university descended into the muddy trench using a specialized portable X-ray fluorescence scanner. He placed the scanner against the silver metallic matrix of the stone. The digital monitor flashed bright green, validating a massive concentrations of extraterrestrial iron, nickel and cosmic isotopes. The scientist looked up at the federal agents, his eyes wide with historical awe. "It is completely untouched by modern pollution. This is a priceless scientific treasure. It's a miracle." Richard's corporate lawyers arrived an hour later, handing over emergency injunctions to stop the government from seizing the rock. A massive federal lawsuit was officially triggered. The developer spent over $200,000 in the first week alone hiring top-tier trial attorneys from Seattle. They filed a formal property claim arguing that the meteorite was an unknown natural anomaly and should belong to the party that discovered and excavated it. But Arthur's legal counsel was an absolute master of ancient American land statutes and property common law. When the case reached the federal district court, Richard sat at the defense table confident that his corporate power would win. But Arthur's lawyer brought out a legal weapon that left the defense completely paralyzed. He presented a Supreme Court precedent from 1892, the historic case of Goddard versus Winchell. In that landmark case, the United States court ruled that meteorites are not wild animals or abandoned property that belong to the finder.
Thank you so
Because
much,
they fall
Thaddeus.
from the heavens and become embedded in the earth, they are legally classified as rocks and minerals of the soil. Therefore they belong absolutely to the owner of the land where they land. But Arthur's lawyer dug the knife even deeper. He brought forward the security footage from Arthur's house showing Richard's crew moving the boundary markers at 2 in the morning. Your Honor, the defense did not just find a stone on their land, Arthur's lawyer argued. They intentionally committed a criminal trespass across a certified fence line to steal mineral wealth from an elderly citizen. We are officially invoking Oregon Revised Statute Section 105.810. The Timber and Mineral Trespass Law. Under this strict state statute, when a party knowingly enters another person's land to remove minerals, rocks or timber without authorization, the court must apply treble damages. This meant Richard was not just going to lose the meteorite. He was now legally liable to pay Arthur 3 times the total estimated market value of the celestial object he tried to steal. The courtroom fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Richard's lawyers frantically whispered to each other, their faces turning pale. The judge looked down at Richard with absolute disgust. The trial lasted for 2 grueling weeks as financial experts debated the exact monetary value of the 3-ton palisite specimen. The final valuation was placed at an incredible $1.8 million due to its unique crystal purity. On the final morning of the trial, the judge slammed his wooden gavel down with a sound like a thunderclap. This court finds the defendant Richard and his corporation guilty of malicious intentional land trespass and attempted mineral conversion, the judge declared. The meteorite is the exclusive property of the plaintiff Arthur. Furthermore, under the treble damages clause of this state, the defendant is ordered to pay the plaintiff 3 times the valued damages of the attempted mineral theft. The final judgment penalty issued against Richard was a staggering $1.2 million in direct criminal restitution. Richard felt the air completely leave his lungs. He collapsed back into his leather chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. His greed had completely backfired. He had entered that garden trying to steal 25 centimeters of grass and a $2 million space rock. Now he was walking out with a $1.2 million debt branded onto his name. The financial dominoes began to fall with brutal speed. To pay off the massive federal judgment and his own staggering legal fees, Richard's real estate empire completely collapsed into bankruptcy. His banks immediately pulled their lines of credit on his luxury apartment project. The half-finished concrete structures were seized by the county. But the ultimate poetic justice was still waiting right next door. Because Richard could not liquidate his corporate assets fast enough, the court issued a structural lien against his personal property. His massive custom-built luxury mansion right next to Arthur's house was put into a forced sheriff's auction. 2 months after the trial, the man who used to dress in expensive Italian suits was completely stripped of everything. The entire neighborhood gathered on the sidewalk to watch the final act of justice. Richard, dressed in an old faded t-shirt, was forced to pack his remaining personal belongings into cheap cardboard boxes. He carried them one by one to a battered rental moving truck. As he walked past the property line, he looked at Arthur, who was sitting on his porch drinking a warm cup of tea. Richard's eyes were full of bitter hatred and defeat. He drove away from the town in the dead of night, completely ruined, humiliated and broke. Peace finally returned to the historic fence line. With his new wealth of $1.2 million, Arthur did something that shocked the entire world of science. He refused to sell the meteorite to private corporate collectors or tech billionaires who wanted to cut it into luxury jewelry. Instead, Arthur officially donated the entire 3-ton palisite masterpiece to the Oregon Museum of Natural History. He wanted to ensure that every child and student could look into those cosmic crystals and dream of the universe. In honor of his incredible generosity, the state government gave Arthur a lifetime preservation grant. They transformed his historic backyard into a fully protected botanical and geological sanctuary. Richard's foreclosed mansion was later bought by a young local family who loved the history of the town. The very first thing they did was hire workers to completely tear down the ugly concrete walls Richard had built. Together with Arthur they planted a beautiful continuous row of blooming red and yellow rose bushes directly across the old property border. A living vibrant boundary built on friendship and respect. The unforgettable saga of Arthur and Richard remains a powerful legend in the state. In the fierce battles of land and greed, the corrupt may use heavy machinery, power and money to alter the surface of the world. But justice has a deep miraculous way of working beneath the dark soil to bring them down to their knees. Never cross a boundary that does not belong to you. Because the earth remembers, and the price of greed is a debt you can never afford to pay. Thank you for watching this incredible journey on Fence Line Feud. If you found this legal victory satisfying, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more deep dive neighborhood wars, and leave your thoughts about Richard's total ruin in the comments below. Stay vigilant, protect your borders, and we will see you in the next feud.